Jonas wakes from his snoring slumber with a start. Briefly disoriented, he stumbles about an empty office building, before encountering a security guard who interrogates him about how he got into the locked building in the first place. Jonas explains he was at a reception held on the second floor earlier, but didn't feel well, so he went to lie down. Turns out he fell asleep, and apparently, no one saw him, so he was left behind and locked inside. The guard isn't budging on Jonas's request to be let out, so he shows him the invitation as proof, imploring him once more that he's got to get to work in about 3 hours himself. Jonas is eventually freed, and the first thing he does is try to catch a cab, which, despite them being seemingly abundant, he fails for a while. When he finally does get a taxi, his driver drones on and on about the disgustingly erroneous topic of drunk women throwing up in his car. Mid-trip, Jonas changes the destination to a street all the way across town, as if deciding they both should suffer. Jonas arrives at his destination in the wee hours of the morning, and hiding behind a bus shed, watches a young woman waving goodbye to her daughter as she heads off to school. The woman heads inside, and Jonas seizes the opportunity to cross the road, anxiously entering her building. The woman, Lee, is practicing her opera piece when she's interrupted by the doorbell. Opening the door, she finds Jonas, who she greets with very little excitement. His response is equally tart as he asks to come in. Lee notes how shit he looks, and Jonas simply responds by handing her a bag with some sort of pastry in it. They share a tense conversation on how long it's been since they've seen each other, before Jonas weakly tries segueing, asking how Lee's been. He mentions he heard her singing, probing her about pushing her voice so early in the morning, and she casually admits to having insomnia, wondering about his own excuse. Jonas takes a shower at her place, sneaking longing looks at her as he gets dressed. They talk a bit and she confides she's psychosomatic, confessing she's now on antibiotics for it. Her next concert is coming up soon, and she's visibly anxious about it, so she changes the subject to how Jonas is doing, asking if the money problems are sorted. Jonas admits they haven't been, with a partner of theirs, Rajasart, having taken some of the company's money and vanishing into thin air. Everyone is in a panic to locate him. He stalls for more time together, insisting on helping Lee fix a light fixture in the kitchen. He asks about her daughter. She brings Jonas back to reality, notifying him his belongings are on the bed. Jonas doesn't take it well, as Lee hands him a shopping bag from a women's store to put his clothes in, a reminder of the wife he recently left thanks to his affair with Lee. He curses, snatching his shirts up and stuffing them into the bag. He grabs his jacket, leaving in a huff, and tells Lee it's best they never see each other again, in a dramatically cliché fashion. Her expression doesn't even change when she closes the door on him. He goes to leave, but then remembers his phone and ends up knocking on her door again, shoving his way inside the apartment to quickly collect his phone. He comes back to Lee at the door, who's crying, despite her cold demeanor earlier, and tries to comfort her. He embraces her, and their hug soon turns steamy as they quickly lose themselves in each other for the last time, making love right there at the entrance of Lee's apartment. When it's over, Jonas still tries hanging onto her neck with leeching kisses, and Lee is forced to push him away to get him out of her apartment. Disillusioned, Jonas leaves, heading to the cafe across the street for an espresso to wake his shot nerves. He asks the cafe owner to put his phone to charge and steps outside for a cigarette. But as he lights it and looks up, he notices Lee's balcony window. Thinking of her, he asks for his phone back for a moment to send a text, but then decides this isn't enough, so requests a notepad and paper. As he starts frustratedly scribbling, the small notepad proves insufficient. With the cafe owner's direction, he hunts down a stationery store with manic single-mindedness for the materials to pen his final love letter. At the store, he hurriedly picks a paper of his liking, demanding 15, actually, make it 30 sheets of paper, and choosing a favorable pen. Upon returning to the cafe, he calls in late to work, postponing a meeting till 10:15, and ordering another coffee when a strange man walks past, carelessly knocking all his papers to the floor. When Jonas curses and tells the man to be careful, he just turns around and stares at him, as if he wants to start a fight, but eventually walks away. Jonas turns to the cafe owner, just about to complain about him, when a caricature of a woman interrupts them, asking the owner if he's seen her boy. He directs her to the bathroom where she speeds off, leaving a plume of her perfume hanging in the air for Jonas to choke on. After that debacle, Jonas finally settles down and begins penning the letter, but finds himself frustrated yet again, as the sounds of the cafe are building around him. An impossibly cheap man attempts to impress his clearly bored date with talks about how he saved money on a printer. A Japanese girl chats on the phone in her native tongue. The cafe owner puts on a song, the indistinct conversations hum in the background. Jonas observes them all for a second, glances out the window at Lee's balcony, and continues writing. He's run out of time, and calls work to defer the meeting for another 15 minutes. When asked for an update on Rajasart, he spins fluff about how he's in the wind, and spares 5 minutes to call his brother-in-law in a feigned attempt to locate him, before going right back to obsessing over the letter. As he's flicking through the pages he's written so far, an energetic black woman enters the cafe, greeting the owner fondly. She asks him for help with a couch that needs to go up to her apartment, but he says he can't leave the counter for the next half hour as the other worker hasn't shown up yet. Hearing this, Jonas offers to help the woman, which the cafe owner seems a bit uncomfortable about, but as the woman kisses his nose, he allows it. As the two unload the couch from her little car, Jonas overhears the perfume lady and her delinquent son screaming at each other on the street. As they carry the couch, Jonas tries to be a gentleman and take the heavier end, suggesting he go on top. The woman easily twists Jonas's comment into a witty innuendo. As they get into the apartment, Jonas sets himself up again, asking how far they should go, which she tells him is a dangerous question. They set the couch down and Jonas looks through the window, noticing Lee's window is directly across, and he spots her as she looks down into her phone. Afraid to be spotted, he backs away. The woman peers out of the window, trying to spot Lee, but she's already gone. When Jonas looks back at the closed window, his heart sinks into his stomach. As they exit the building, Jonas sees Lee leave, and the woman remarks about Jonas's interest in her. Seeing the look on his face, she offers to read his palm, and though he is skeptical at first, he eventually gives her his hand. She observes the lines of his palm, but then closes his fingers in, deciding to tell him later, which makes him nervous. He wonders if the situation is bad. The woman only proclaims she's late, and thanking Jonas once more, drives off. Jonas returns to the cafe to catch the owner hovering round his table, boldly reading the letter he wrote for Lee, and he's flabbergasted by the man's rudeness. How could he just go through a stranger's personal belongings like that? Jonas hurriedly goes to pack his things and escape from the cafe. The owner hovers around his table and muses a compliment about his writing, offering him a drink to apologize, but Jonas declines. He goes to pay the bill, but the man refuses the money. He can't help but talk to Jonas about how he must be feeling. Revealing that he looked at almost all of the letter, he couldn't help it when he'd seen how determined Jonas looked while writing. A little shyly, Jonas asks for his opinion. The owner expresses great interest and confesses he's figured out the letter is about the young girl next door. He tells Jonas what little he's experienced of her while in the area, and the topic makes Jonas want to linger again, so he takes the owner up on his offer of a drink. Right after it's poured, the perfume lady comes in, causing the entire cafe to hold their breath. She orders a decaf and complains to the barista about her son as she returns, laughing like a madwoman after disparaging her son's intelligence, and leaving in a puff of scent. As the barista fans the remaining perfume from his nose, he notes Jonas's phone is ringing for the umpteenth time. It's Jonas's ex-wife this time, and he lets the phone ring out with no answer. Shortly after, he calls work, pushing his meeting back yet again, till noon this time, with a whole new slew of excuses. As he hangs up, he goes back to his scribbling, and the barista notices Jonas's shaking pen hand. He feels it prudent to advise Jonas yet again on the content of the letter, to make it more nuanced, a bit lighter, to hold some things back to make other feelings stronger. He allows the barista to read the final letter once more, pacing nervously as he waits for his review. Once done, the barista groups the pages and gravely asks Jonas if he's serious, looking disappointed. Jonas is confused, unsure if his reaction is good or bad, but before he can get clarity, the owner answers a phone call, putting in his stock order for the week. Jonas tries to interrupt and get a response out of him, but he doesn't budge. When he hangs up, he asks Jonas what he does for a living, and if he's written before, and he admits he hasn't. He just runs a construction firm. He says he should leave and head to work, but as he goes to pay for his last drink, he notices chicory with ham on the cafe's menu, and remarks how it reminds him of his grandfather. When Jonas's phone chimes with a work text from Daniel, he makes another excuse to run, telling the barista he'll have lunch before leaving. While eating, he thumbs through his pages, ignoring yet another call from Harriet, his ex-wife. As he goes to text his apologies, he looks up to see Lee walking back to her apartment with a young man, and he stops to observe. Lee and the guy seem friendly, and she pats him on the shoulder before going upstairs, alone. Jonas sighs with relief as the man walks away. And then Daniel calls again about lunch. They were supposed to have lunch with the insurance agents. Jonas subsequently argues with him for setting up these meetings without running it by him first, even though Daniel has been trying to get onto him all day. He reacts defensively when Daniel calls out his erratic behavior and tries to convince him yet again to stall the meeting for 15 minutes, but as soon as he turns around, he sees the guy outside Lee's building again. This time, he's going up. At that moment, Jonas seems to forget the conversation he just had, and abandoning all reason, desperately begs the cafe owner to borrow the keys to his apartment so he can spy on Lee and her guest. He watches them interact through the window, going from one room to the next, till they pause somewhere in the middle, in a spot he can't see anymore. He tries to dial her phone, but it goes straight to voicemail. He runs out of the building, heading across the street to her place, bounding up the stairs and placing an invasive ear against her door, but his breathing and heartbeat are so heavy, he can't hear anything. He resorts to breaking into the apartment, stealthily unlocking the door, gently opening it to hear their conversation, but it makes a squeak, and he quickly hides. Lee comes over and checks the door, scolding her male friend Nino for not locking it, and goes back to her conversation, bantering with him about the cost of living in Paris, trying to dodge his advances. He makes a move on her and she pushes him away, claiming she's not in the mood, and he demands to know if what he felt when they made love was real. Lee ironically uses Jonas's quote on him, and he admonishes her, grabbing her and forcefully trying to show her how aroused he is. She rejects him again, and he cockily claims resisting turns her on. If she didn't like it, she could just slap him, and so she does. Sitting down, Lee tries to catch her breath as she breaks up with Nino, telling him she's tired of the mood swings, and he's unbearable to deal with. Nino sulks, realizing it's truly over, and goes to grab his jacket, while Jonas, dazed, approaches Lee, as she continues explaining she needs clarity to Nino. She screams as she turns around, while Jonas, unfazed by her surprise, asks how long her affair has been going on. The three have a screaming match before Lee kicks both the men out. As they exit the building, Nino calls Jonas a loser, and the men break into a fight on the sidewalk, which the cafe owner and one of his staff members run outside to break up. The men cool off at the cafe, literally icing their bruises, and Nino offers his expert psychological diagnosis of Lee, explaining to Jonas that she's seeking her father through the men she sleeps with. Jonas, being the older, more paternal figure of the two, doesn't take kindly to the opinion, but the barista quells their bickering before it starts again. Nino confesses to truly loving Lee, despite her flaws, and that makes Jonas truly look at him for the first time. It's in that moment, Jonas realizes he recognizes Nino. Nino confirms they've seen each other before, as he used to be a stagehand in Aches, and saw Jonas attend one of Lee's concerts, admitting that Lee often complained back then that Jonas would never leave his wife. Jonas is thrown, wondering how many more other partners Lee had turned to, but Nino assures him it doesn't matter, and that he'll see no competition for Lee's affection from him. The men shake hands and Nino leaves Jonas at the cafe, spinning in his indignation. The cafe owner had seen Nino and Lee together before, and Jonas feels betrayed he never mentioned it prior. Rolling his eyes, the owner tries to get Jonas to see reason, that Nino wasn't entirely incorrect about Lee. Jonas refuses to hear it, reacting defensively. He apologizes for his terse reaction, and for being at the cafe instead of chasing Rajasart, as if somehow the cafe owner can absolve him of shirking his responsibilities. Jonas watches as the blue sweatsuited delinquent comes outside and screams for seemingly no reason, and he contemplates what kind of day he's had. His thoughts are interrupted by his vibrating phone, and he checks it with a sigh, seeing it's Harriet again. The cafe owner encourages him to take the call. Harriet finally gets to inform him that she'll be going to Strasbourg for 3 days, so their son is out of town at a friend's place. They agree to meet quickly to discuss some co-parenting issues, and before leaving the cafe, as Jonas takes his last smoke, the cafe owner asks what he'll do with the letter now. On the bus ride to meet Harriet, Jonas anxiously flicks through his pages again while ignoring another call from Daniel. As he glances out the window, he sees the black woman, whom he assumed was the owner's girlfriend, kissing another man on the sidewalk, in a moment that seems very intimate. Jonas is shocked. He meets Harriet in a cafe, and the first thing she asks him about is Rajasart and work. It was very unlike him to make a deal with a known crook. She tries to mention she's happy to see him, but Jonas is still hyper-defensive, snapping at every comment she makes. He gives her the monthly child support check, and she provides him with some notary papers and a copy of their son Lucas's school report to look over. As he regards it, he asks his wife what's wrong with him, as the grades seem fine, and she explains it isn't his schoolwork, but his mood and mental state. She confides she checked the computer's search history and found her 11-year-old son had looked up very graphic videos of women being violently sodomized, and was aghast. As a mother, she has no idea how to approach or discuss the situation with her son without making him feel ashamed. Jonas thinks it's as simple as telling him that that isn't what love is, but Harriet disagrees, subtly mentioning that Lucas keeps photos of the construction site on his wall. She suggests to Jonas that Lucas misses him, and poses the question, if that isn't love, what is? He deflects by prying into her current love life, and Harriet confesses she is seeing someone. She refocuses her attention on his exhausted state, strongly advising him to get some rest or take a vacation, as she's concerned for his health. As he gets up to walk Harriet to her platform, he notices his keys are missing. That afternoon, while on a bus back to the other side of town, Jonas handles some more business calls. He arrives back at the cafe shortly after Lee arrives home with her daughter, after picking her up from school. As Jonas enters, he notices the blue sweatsuit man dining at a table, and the cafe owner teases him about his habit of pretending to forget things as an excuse to come back. Jonas makes eye contact with the photo of the cafe owner's girlfriend on the wall, and quickly changes the subject, asking if he's seen Lee go out. They're interrupted by Mr. Maju, Rajasart's brother-in-law and a business partner of Jonas's. Mr. Maju announces that he's brought news of Rajasart, but before he can even say anything, Jonas interrupts him and goes on a rant about Rajasart, Mr. Maju finally gets a word in, telling Jonas Rajasart took his own the previous day. Shame washes over Jonas, and he tries to make amends by asking how Mr. Maju is coping, though it's far too little too late. Mr. Maju confesses he believed a face-to-face conversation would have been more tactful. As he reveals more details about Rajasart's previously unknown debts, the sweatsuit delinquent curses and suddenly rises from his chair, steak knife in hand, heading towards his mother on the other side of the street. Just as Mr. Maju criticizes Jonas for being the type who lets emotions cloud their thoughts, he looks up and notices the man crossing the road with the knife and springs into action. He speeds over to him, narrowly grabbing his arms and pulling him away from his mother before he slashes her, and with the help of Paulo and the cafe owner, who come barreling out soon after, they restrain him, pinning him to the ground. Exhausted and with adrenaline pumping, Jonas walks away to catch his breath, before suddenly passing out. The sweatsuit man is taken into police custody as his codependent mother weeps, and Lee looks out her window just in time to see Jonas rolled into an ambulance and carted away. Lee visits Jonas at the hospital, and when he wakes, gives him a sarcastic lecture about his so-called fragile heart, though the doctor's stats say his heart is perfectly fine. She asks what happened and he explains, leaving out the reason he was still at the cafe. She gets up to grab some water, suddenly feeling hot, and kindly offers some to the old man in the hospital bed across from him. As she returns to his side, Jonas takes her hand, squeezing it gently, whispering about how well they know each other. He's still desperate to try and get her back, but Lee states that the love is gone. Devastated, Jonas's last-ditch effort is trying to locate the letter and his things to give to Lee, but he's left it all at the cafe. Grabbing her bag, Lee insists she wants nothing from him at all, that he's in love with only his sorrow, and with that, she leaves. That night, Jonas calls his son in an attempt to connect with him. But the conversation is awkward, strained, and Lucas cuts him off abruptly to go and play games with his friend, seemingly unconcerned about his father. He is feeling the despair of being totally alone and having lost everything. All the precious connections in life he values, first Harriet, then Lee, and now finally his own son. Jonas bursts into tears in the backseat of the taxi, finally letting his emotions show for the first time. He arrives back at the cafe yet again, where he asks the night shift bartender, a young woman, for his bag. While she fetches it, he notices the black woman and the cafe owner watching the night's performance, looking very close again. Collecting his bag from the girl, he thumbs through the letter's pages again, and is interrupted by the black woman informing him that his heroics have made him the talk of their neighborhood. They share a smoke outside the cafe, and Jonas can't help but stare at Lee's silhouette in her window, expertly diverting the conversation to her day. His companion mentions her visit to Gare de l'Est to put an end to something, as well as a job interview she found difficult, because of the personal nature of the questions asked. He inquires what her preferred field is, and she notes that he's suddenly a much better listener now than he was earlier in the day. She makes a remark alluding to the idea that they've some chemistry, but that she sees where Jonas looks, nodding towards Lee's window. As she leaves, he asks her what she saw in his palm reading earlier, and again she defers, to tell him at a later date. Jonas takes one last check of the letter and returns to the stationery store around the corner. They've already closed, but the woman allows Jonas in. This time, he shows concern for the pregnant woman, asking if she's tired and how far along she is. He returns to the cafe to put the letter together, and the owner asks him if he's made a copy of it, trying to implore him once more to not give the letter to Lee. Jonas insists it's just a goodbye letter, and there's no use keeping it, but the owner tells him that that's the trap, that goodbyes only restore the bond. The owner suggests that maybe he wrote it just for himself. As Jonas takes a moment to think about that, he realizes he's never asked the cafe owner's name before. The owner finally gets the opportunity to introduce himself as Matthew, as the men exchange names with a note of finality. As Matthew heads back inside, Jonas mentions to him that his girlfriend is funny. Confused, Matthew asks if he means Laubna, the black woman, and explains she's not his girlfriend. She's his half-sister. Matthew's girlfriend resides in Brussels. With that, the men say goodbye a final time, and Jonas addresses the envelope with the letter. He crosses the street to Lee's building, and as he goes to enter, he spots Laubna further down the street. At first, he enters the building, but moments later, he knocks on Laubna's car window, asking her for a ride. She obliges, on the condition that they play a silent game on the ride home. The first person to talk loses, and Jonas agrees. They communicate with only subtle looks as the rain begins pattering on the glass, and slowly, Jonas slips the letter from his bag. Opening the envelope, he sticks the pages out the window, letting the wind and rain blow away all his old feelings. Meanwhile, back at the cafe, Matthew pulls out a copy of the letter he made in secret, looking at it fondly before sealing it away.